My dad was a great salesman, and I kind of fell in love with the art of the salesman through my father. You know, when I meet a great salesman, I'm really turned on by him. I went to a clothing store about 3 weeks ago to buy a shirt, and I ended up leaving with 2 pairs of pants and a jacket. Yeah. And the guy just mesmerized me. He was so good. Mm-hmm. And I left the store, you know, it was Men's Warehouse, and I went home. And the next day I said to myself, geez, you got to go back there and talk to this guy. Mm-hmm. And I did. And I walked over to the guy and I said, you know, you're really terrific. You're a great salesman. And he looked at me like, where are you coming from? Mm-hmm.
Well, something that occurred to me while I was reading the book in relation to the theme of salesmanship is, how do you feel that in the bigger picture, in our culture, we are being sold things, the equivalent, say politically, of the 2 shirts and the 3 pairs of pants that you bought? Do you think we're being sold a lot of things?
I'm sure we're being sold a lot of things. I mean, you know,
apart from the materialistic.
Yeah, I mean, we could, you know, not to get into a political discussion or a political debate, but I'm an Obama supporter for one thing. But I think a lot of the attractiveness of Obama is that he's a great salesman, and he particularly was a great salesman when he first ran for president. He was a guy that could engender hope. He could sell hope. And I think more than anything else, that's what a salesman sells. He sells himself and he sells hope.
You talked a little bit about your mother and father. Your mother was an artist and your father was a lighting salesman. They obviously would have lived through the Depression, the economic depression of the 30s. How do you think that affected them, and how in turn did that affect you?
Let me answer the question a little differently than the way you posed it. My parents were a tremendous polarity. My mother was an artist. She was a great painter and sculptress. And when I was a kid, she introduced me to the arts. She introduced me to color, to juxtaposition. She took me to drumming class, and I became a drummer, and I'm a drummer to this day. Rhythm is very important in my writing. My father was a salesman. I was in love with his salesmanship, you know, with his charisma, you know, with his wheeling and dealing. And that kind of polarity is kind of like guided me as a writer. You know, my subjects, you know, are largely informed by my father. My art is informed by my mother.
Mm-hmm. While I was reading this book, I couldn't help but think of probably one of the most famous works about a salesman, which is Arthur Miller's book, The Death of a Salesman. And he said that Willie, the man that he based Willie Loman upon, was a competitor at all times, and that he said also it was a house in which you never lost hope. Is that something that's part of the character of a great salesman?
I think so. You know, I think to be a great salesman, you don't lose hope. You know, my dad, when he was dying, you know, of throat cancer, and he couldn't speak, was still a great salesman. In fact, I used to make calls with him. You know, I was his voice. I knew what he wanted me to say, but he was still closing the deal. He had hope even at the end. Mm-hmm. I think if the salesman loses hope, you know, he's no longer a great salesman.
Do you think that's what happens, Willie Loman, that he loses hope? That's his tragedy?
I think so.
Miller also said that he felt it was fruitless to look for hope outside oneself. What do you think of that?
It makes sense to me. I hadn't thought of it before, but it feels right. Mm-hmm. I mean, you know, the hope has to be within yourself. It has to be deeply within yourself for it to be real. You know, if you're trying to grab it and snatch it from the outside, you know, it's not going to have the impulsion to go where you need to go with it.
Mm-hmm.